The Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 392 is pretty incredible right out of the gate, but with a few key modifications, you can make this thing not only more reliable, but work better on-road and off. So the first mod I would recommend to any 392 owner is to go get a Taser JL Mini from Z Automotive. This is a module that you pair with the Jeep, and it's going to allow you to do things like change tire size, completely delete traction control nannies, you can change your TPMS thresholds. But why it's so important for the 392 really has to do with the transfer case. What this module will give you the ability to do is put it into something called forced rear wheel drive, and effectively you're able to make the Jeep two-wheel drive, which is not an option from the factory. Now the 3022 transfer case comes in other models other than the 392, and in those models it actually has a two-wheel drive feature, and all it's doing is releasing that clutch pack so you have two-wheel drive. Now when you're driving around in 4 Auto, that clutch pack is active. The more throttle input you give, the more pressure it puts on that clutch pack, so the front end will pull. The problem is if you're towing, or if you got a larger tire, or even if you're just driving aggressively, you're putting more wear on that clutch pack, and there have been many reports. I've got a good buddy of mine that basically his failed on him with less than 15,000 miles, and so he was driving around 4 Auto 37s, just being a little aggressive with it, and he had, that clutch failure, and under warranty they swapped out the entire transfer case. So that means to me that it's easier to do that than it is to rebuild that clutch assembly. Now if you want to preserve your clutch, the easiest way to do it is just drive the Jeep in two-wheel drive. You're not going to hurt the transfer case. If anything, you're going to put a little bit more pressure on that rear axle, but these JL Dana 44s are pretty fantastic. I haven't seen any cases of where someone put their JL 392 in two-wheel drive and immediately blew apart the rear axle. I highly recommend it. I have no affiliation with Taser or Z Automotive. I just think it's a good product. It's around 350 bucks, and it's literally the cheapest way to make sure that you don't tear up the clutch pack so you can preserve it. If you're somebody that really likes to go off-road a lot, I really think it's a good investment, so you don't have to worry about that clutch pack basically failing on you. It might still eventually, but so far with the type of wheeling that I do, I haven't had a single issue. I haven't felt like it slipped or not engaging correctly. If you feel that your Wrangler 392 steering is a little heavy, one way you can fix this is by getting a set of aftermarket lower control arms. From the factory, these Jeeps have 2 inches of lift, and that puts the caster at about 4.3 degrees. The reason being is they don't actually use a different lower control arm on the Wrangler 392 as what's standard on all other Wranglers. Now these JLs actually like a bit more caster, so if you want to dial it in to say 6 degrees to make it a little bit lighter on the steering, you need to get a set of aftermarket control arms. Now my Wrangler 392 is lifted. It comes with a set of fixed length control arms that put my caster right about 6.3 degrees. It drives really nice, and with the ability to put the Jeep in two-wheel drive with the Taser, the front end feels a lot lighter. Now one thing that I feel like Jeep kind of dropped the ball on is the fact that these Jeeps come with a 2-inch lift, and when they first made the 392 available, it only had the small 33-inch tall tire. To me it looked a little lost. Even with the 35 it looked better, but I have found that you can put a 37-inch tall tire under the Jeep Wrangler 392 without modifying the suspension. So you don't need any additional lift. What you do need is a 2-inch bump stop spacer bolted to the rear axle. Now up front, you don't have to do anything. That's because the bump stop tower on all 392 Wranglers is actually 2 inches longer than a standard Wrangler. So you can easily cycle a true to size 37-inch tall tire without modifying the suspension in terms of lifting the vehicle. That being said, as soon as you go off-road, you'll find the shortcomings, and they're really 2 specific ones. Number one, you don't have a lot of suspension travel up front. I think it's a total of 6 inches from the collapse bump to full droop, and that's not a lot. I will tell you that I have found that I constantly lift up a front tire off-road wheeling with the factory suspension. And that's not very comforting, and you're putting a lot of stress on the front end when you're doing that. in terms of shock valving. I think that light valving works really nice on road, but the challenge is as soon as you go off road and you start to drive a little bit more aggressive, that heavy V8 just makes it blow through the suspension, and you're constantly topping out due to the low suspension travel, and then you're blowing through it because it just doesn't have enough valving. So if you want to fix that, you've got a few options. The simplest is to change out the suspension, but it's more expensive. If you want to step into a different shock, you may be able to do so with like a 0 to 1.5 lift shock. You just got to make sure you're not going to unseat that front coil with an aftermarket shock. I looked at this and kind of went back and forth. Ultimately, I knew I wanted more suspension travel and I wanted more ground clearance for the type of wheeling I like to do. I have a JKS 2.5-inch suspension lift. That really helped ground clearance wise, but more than anything, it gave me some more suspension travel so the tire can stay planted a little bit better. I still lift the tire with this thing every now and again, but I definitely like the ride quality of the coils, but more importantly, I opted for Fox 2.5 DSC adjuster shocks, and I would highly recommend if you are thinking about trying to dial in your suspension for your Wrangler, the Fox DSC line is really nice. I've got them on a few Jeeps, and my experience with them is they're not snake oil. The compression adjusters actually really work. Low speed compression adjustment allows you to dial in basically the sway of the vehicle. So if it feels like it's really loose, a few clicks of the low speed and it's going to tighten it right up. And the high speed is high speed impact. So, you know, hitting something really hard off road, it's going to control the shock better. When you have this heavy V8, you really need something like that if you want to drive this thing off road and really get the most performance and honestly comfort out of it. I take my kids when I go wheeling. I don't want them to be like, Dad, this thing rides terrible. You know, we have long days on the trail. This was a really good investment for that. There are a lot of really good suspension kits out there, and I don't want to say you have to use this one, you know, to make your Jeep better. Rock Crawler makes awesome stuff. EVA Manufacturing makes awesome stuff. JKS makes awesome stuff. Really, what I would recommend is, you know, whoever's kit you go with, tell them what you plan on doing with the Jeep. If you're going to go fast in the desert, you might need a bigger Fox 3.0 shock. If you want to get, you know, a ton of suspension travel, maybe look at the Evo stuff where they've got coilovers that give you like 15 inches of travel. So you need to figure out what makes sense for what you're going to be doing with the Jeep. But I will tell you, if you're going to spend a lot of time off-road, I highly recommend modifying the suspension, getting it dialed in, just so you can control that heavy V8. Now, an easy way to get more ground clearance out of the back of your 392 is to rotate the exhaust tips up. Doing so might not seem like a big mod, but these things are very susceptible to damage and they're very expensive. By loosening up the clamps, you can actually get about 2 inches of ground clearance, so that's a pretty good amount. Now, once you're done with the trail and you want to rotate these things back down, it's very easy, as the muffler actually has exhaust guide tips, so you can actually rotate them down, lock them right back in place from the factory, so there's no guesswork. I keep mine rotated up. It doesn't really bother me. I'm not melting any plastic or doing anything like that. I kind of like how they look, more leveled out. If you're going to be doing more adventurous wheeling in the rocks, you're eventually probably going to need to swap this out. I don't personally care for the big exhaust cages that are for these things. If I tear this thing up, I'll probably go with something like a MagnaFlow Rock Crawler high clearance exhaust system. Now let's talk about a few front end modifications that are definitely worth it if you're going to be off-roading your 392. Number one, I love the fact that all 392s come with a steel front bumper group. It's really nice to be able to remove those outer wings so you have a stubby front bumper, which is going to help with your approach angle off-road and give a little bit more room for a larger tire. Now if you're going to be doing more serious wheeling, I highly recommend installing a winch. And even though Jeep considers this a winch ready front bumper, what that really means is you need a winch plate before you can actually install the winch. I'm using one from Warren. There are a lot of good options out there. The big thing to note before buying a winch is make sure you get the proper winch rating. To do that, all you need to do is look at the vehicle's gross vehicle weight rating and a minimum multiply that by 1.5. So for something like this, that's going to be around 9,000 pounds. I like to go a little bit higher, and so I'll go with a 10,000 if I'm going to be close to that. I always round up, not down. So I'm using a Warren VR10S. The S stands for synthetic rope. I like the rope. It's a little bit lighter, easier to handle. This particular winch has a very good line speed and low amp draw, so it's just a good all-around winch in general. It sits in here fairly low, so you're not really blocking any of the grills, so I don't have to worry about overheating this big V8. Here's one of the first things that I always do regardless of the type of Wrangler, and that is swap out the long obnoxious antenna for one of these Stubbies. I'll put the link in the description of what I use. Not only do I think they look better, but you don't have to worry about hitting them on the trail and grabbing and smacking into your paint constantly. This is well worth it. I know that all of the new Wranglers now have moved the antenna to the glass, which is going to make that windshield very expensive, but if you have an older Wrangler or one of these, I definitely recommend going with a Stubby antenna. Now, another upgrade that is definitely worth considering is at the front axle, specifically with the CV axle shafts. All 392s come with CVs from the factory, and you have to have them basically because the 3022 transfer case is sending power to that front end. And so on the road, you need to make sure that that wheel is turning at a constant speed whenever it changes direction. If you had a traditional U-joint, you would get what's known as crow hop, and that change in speed would make the front end really, hard to drive. It'd push back on your steering. So you have to have a CV for this style of transfer case. Now, I wasn't really worried about those initially, and then I ended up putting 38s on this Jeep for a little while because I wanted to test if I could do it and how it would feel. And immediately when I was wheeling, I could hear clicking coming from the front end. I'd never heard that before. My gut was that was something with the CV either getting ready to fail or just putting under too much stress. So I decided, even though I went back to a 37, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have an issue with the factory CV axle shaft, so I upgraded to a set from RCV Performance. Now, these are still CV style shafts, but it's very unique over what a factory CV is like. And not only is it significantly stronger, it's actually guaranteed to up to a 43-inch tall tire, which I would never even come close to on the factory Dana 44 front axle. I do want to preface this as well with, I know I get questions about this a lot. Why not go ahead and do ball joints at the same time? I haven't had any ball joint failure out of the Wrangler JL or a Gladiator. I know they're known for having, not going the distance, but I haven't had a set fail on me yet. I will say when and if it happens, I will move up to a Dynatrac ball joint just for the fact that I've had really good luck with them with the JK platform. I know they make them for the JL. And my experience with Dynatrac products has been really stellar, so I think that's the way that I'll go. But I don't think right out of the gate I would say, oh, that's an immediate weak link that you have to do. But the CVs, I would definitely swap out if you're going to be doing more serious wheeling. Well, at the end of the day, I still think the Wrangler 392 is pretty incredible right out of the box, and it doesn't take much to make it that much better. If you've got any questions, just drop them in the comments. If you want to know more about some of the mods I've done to this Jeep, I can easily link you out to some of the other videos. If you want to see some stuff I'm working on behind the scenes, you can check me out on Instagram at Ali Mansour Editor. And if you did like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It absolutely helps. Well, I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope to see you on the trail. Take care.